I don't know if you want to make a start, Carol.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Just checking that you could all hear me okay. If you could give me the thumbs up, that'd be great. Nice to see some familiar faces and also a couple of new faces as well. It's fantastic. So welcome, everyone. It's so nice to be here. It's great that everyone has taken the time to be here to talk about something which is very dear to my heart and other commission members' heart as well, and also very important for the sector. So thank you for attending. We will be hosted today by Living Black at University Commission. The purpose of the commission is to respond to the findings of the Living Black at University research at the national level. There are 10 recommendations, and today we will be focusing on recommendation 5, which to summarize is, thank you very much, to improve the representation of Black people as employees to reflect the diversity of students. I'm very pleased that we have MRG here to start the discussion. And we also have Sam Kinsley, who would also be talking about creating an inclusive environment. And then we'll have questions and answers by Jenny Shaw. And there will be a QR code where you can click on that code, include your questions, and then we'll be able to focus on that towards the end. And then we'll have closing remarks by Melissa. I'm very mindful that we have an hour, so I'm not going to go around and do introductions, but you'll have the opportunity to have the information we have here afterwards, the slides. And then if there's any questions that you have, please put them in the chat. And if we're not able to respond to all the questions, we will get back to you afterwards. So without further ado, I'd like to say thank you very much for attending, and also I'll hand over to MRG, who will do their own introduction. So thank you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So Sian and I are here representing MRG. For those of you that haven't worked with us or don't know us from the market, we specialise in the recruitment and search for strategic roles into universities, the wider real estate sector. And my area that I focus on specifically is commercial services and student accommodation. And my colleague Sian heads up our University People brand, which focuses on the more central roles, focusing on such centralised areas of the university. She also heads up our school leadership brand as well. So today we're going to talk through, from our perspective, ways that we can break down some of the barriers and walls hiring Black people into universities. So, just as a starting thought, we wanted to just pose a few questions to everyone, really. And I appreciate that we're not going to be able to have everyone here answer all the questions, but we might try and pick on a few at the end, just for some shared experiences. So if we just move to question 1, Sam, if that's okay. What are the barriers to hiring Black talent in higher education? And then question 2. What barriers have you personally experienced as either a Black candidate or seen as a hiring manager? So I appreciate not everyone would have come up against this, but if you have a think over the next sort of 10-15 minutes about whether you've got any personal experience, and if you do want to share with the group, we'll be coming back towards the end of the conversation just to see if anyone wants to share any personal experiences.
So I think that we really need to look at the way that we are advertising our roles, and for me this goes back before the actual advert, and also looking at the job description. As you can imagine, James and I see job descriptions written by our university clients on a daily basis. And even with the amount of experience that we've got, I quite often find myself sitting there Googling some of the acronyms and jargon that is not only very sector specific, but in some cases very institution specific as well. So I think, one of the things that we can do to diversify the applications that we're getting is really to focus on the skills that are required for the role, rather than that sort of jargon and lingo that you only find in sometimes even within the department that's recruiting. Another thing that we can do, and I think a lot of big organisations that have seen success in increasing representation, is by including positive language and positive action statements within the advertising. I'm a real fan of, rather than just saying we want applications from Black candidates, why we are passionate about creating a diverse workforce. Why should somebody consider applying to this role? So I think the positive action is really important, and a really important tool. The other thing to avoid, and we hear a lot about this with gender, and sort of removing phrases that sort of will represent a gender bias, but I think that's also something that's really important in this on this agenda as well, and that is removing phrases that perpetuate either a racial or faith bias. And a classic example of that is strong English language skills. It's about communication, it's not about English, and would put people off that maybe don't have English as their first language. I think the other thing that we see a lot, certainly within sector, is where do we advertise? So are we just going to put an advert on the university website, the company website, and jobs.ac, for example? There are many websites out there that are specifically targeting certain sectors. BME Jobs is a good example. Diversity.com, another one. And I think that really goes to show your commitment as an organisation to diversity, and goes back to how you're representing yourself, but also attracting a wider range of candidates at all levels, which is also really important. I think the final thing is the partnering with professional networks. There's a lot of organisations that are doing huge amounts to diversify their membership and to promote the roles within sort of professional networks. So by linking in with professional networks and other organisations to advertise roles, also look at more innovative ways of advertising. Looking at sort of social media campaigns, looking at connecting with things like community groups to be able to advertise jobs, and that is something that is really good at all levels as well, because at the end of the day it's about bringing diversity into the sector at all levels, not just at a leadership level.
So moving on to the EVP, employer value proposition. There's lots of proactive things that we can do during the process of recruiting someone. But I think you need to think about the journey of the candidate when they apply for a job from the start to finish. And your university EVP is definitely a part of that, and plays a really important representative tool in terms of the field that you're trying to attract. I think there are many ways that you can look at your EVP. A classic one is around your website and what that looks like. I think that when a candidate looks to apply for a job, one of the first things they'll do is go onto the university website. And if that isn't a fair representation of both your workforce that you're trying to attract, but also your community of candidates as well, then I think it's it's a barrier for a lot of candidates, a lot of Black candidates in particular, that feel that they don't fit the mold of the university. And I think that's a real problem for a lot of candidates that want to apply for jobs. That could be the imagery that's on the website. Do the people on the website reflect, the student and work population that you have there? I think from a retention point of view, this is particularly important. Your EVP does a lot for your retention strategy. And I know Sam's going to talk about that in a bit more detail later. But, I think, you should be working with various people throughout the university departments, trying to make sure that, you are well represented as a group within the institution. And the final thing I wanted to mention was around job titles. When you make the application, does the job title put you off making an application? Is it too complicated? Sian talked about jargon and words that people don't necessarily understand or have an affiliation to. It needs to be clear what the job is in the title, and that can help to, break down barriers with certain groups within society. So moving on to Black talent in leadership roles, I think one of the key things that the university should be looking to do, in my opinion, is have very clear EDI objectives. It has to be part of the conversation at every level. It can't be something that is an afterthought or is something that people do for individual roles. It needs to be ingrained into the university's strategy and needs to be spoken about at a strategic level on a long-term basis. So it's not just done as a fad or a phase of hiring processes. This should be embedded into every single role that the university recruits and part of an ongoing long-term strategy that's being discussed at every level. I think the other key thing that universities can do is introduce mentorship and sponsorship. This gives people at lower level, I suppose, leaders to look up to. It gives people opportunity to ask, questions, understand how they can develop, and then hopefully, gain a forum in which they can succeed within the university as well.
One of the things that can be a barrier to Black people being recruited is unconscious bias. And at the Management Recruitment Group, we put all our new recruits, no matter what part of the business they're working in, through unconscious bias training. And I think that's really essential, particularly for anybody that is involved with a recruitment process or a selection process for recruitment. One of the things that can support that is anonymising the recruitment process. So we will anonymise applications as they are received. We also have a panel decision process. So at no point in the recruitment process is a single person making a decision, so that you're always having the sort of diversity of decision making as well. So not only just at selection panel, not only at the final interview, but at every point through the recruitment process, that is done based on skills. It is data led, it is unbiased, and that's something that's really important throughout the recruitment process. I think also that goes on to assessment as well. If we can look at the next slide. I think how candidates are assessed through the process is also really important. This is something that's not just about diversifying. It's also about bringing people in from other sectors. So we, as a sector, we're never going to increase diversity if we're only recruiting from our own pool of candidates. So I think that supporting candidates from outside of sector is really, really important to the success that we're going to have in diversifying higher education. So I think one of the things that I see a lot is sort of questions at the final interview and questions in the selection process very much focused on HE, the classic presentation, you know, from your understanding of the challenges in the sector, what would you do? And you see this so often, and it's unintentional, but it is very much weighted towards candidates that have already got that sector experience. I think asking open-ended questions, so don't assume a specific cultural background, give candidates the space to respond in a way that's authentic to them. There's also a really there's some really interesting case studies around giving candidates the questions ahead of the interview, and that's something that we have seen more and more organisations doing, and that gives candidates the opportunity to really plan their response and gives them the time to think about the questions more effectively. The other thing that we're all, you know, we are need to be much more aware of is giving candidates the opportunity to talk about how they would go about things rather than just how they've done it in the past. So judge candidates on their approach, on their thought processes, on their ability to come up with potential solutions, rather than just asking questions like, in your past experience, when have you done this? When have you done, you know, it's about judging candidates on their potential rather than a tick box of experiences that they've had.
Yeah, and just to finish off, ultimately, it is important that Black talent is given the opportunity to reach their potential, given clear routes upwards by line managers, HR teams, as well as access to mentors and sponsorship. I think these things are things that you expect generally, but you know, aren't always there. And I think if you ask a lot of people at universities whether they feel they have access to mentors, sponsorship, whether they have people to look up to at the university, unfortunately, that isn't the case. And you know, we feel that's a big problem and something that needs to be addressed sooner rather than later.
Thank you both. Did you want to take any feedback from your original questions before we move on?
We're conscious of time. If we're okay and anyone wants to contribute, then absolutely, we'd love to hear from one person or two. If anyone's got their hand up, if not, we can move on.
I think maybe people are saving questions for the end, so
yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm Sam Kingsley and I'm a belonging and engagement consultant. I also co-convene the Living Black at University Commission alongside Jenny Shaw and work with all the commissioners to design actions that we can use to improve the experiences of Black students across the UK, but also the experiences of Black staff and everyone who works and studies within the sector. So in this section, we'll be shifting our focus from the recruitment angle to retention. Hiring diverse staff is kind of just the first step, but creating an environment where Black employees thrive is just as crucial. We want them to stay once they get there. So, and we know that Black staff do apply to work within HE, but we also know that retention is an issue. So creating an inclusive workplace is not just about the recruitment practice, it's also about creating an environment where Black employees feel supported, valued and empowered to succeed without the need to conform to Eurocentric norms or to code switch. And to build those environments, we really need to think about things like intersectionality, recognising that Black people are not a homogenous group. Their experiences are shaped by multiple factors, including gender, nationality, whether they are from a first or second generation family, whether they were born here or elsewhere. Thinking about things like socioeconomic background and sexual orientation. For example, Black women often face the double burden of racial and gender bias. I know I have. And also LGBTQ plus employees may experience additional challenges related to identity and acceptance. And where they can, they often hide it. Because it's sometimes easier to navigate the world with the things that you know you're going to be that are visibly identifiable, and hide the things that are not so identifiable. So I just wanted to start by talking about why retention matters, and I've got a few stats. So 6.1% of UK national academic staff identified as belonging to Black and minority ethnic groups, with an even smaller proportion specifically identifying as Black. And as you might imagine, from an academic perspective, there's lots of programs already, such as WEN's program, about more Black women professors, for example. This is a very, very small number, and much smaller than the almost less than half of the number of people who identify as part of these groups across the UK. So I think the last census had us at 13%. This isn't representative of our society, and HE should be representative. 35% of Black employees intended to leave their jobs within 2 years, compared to 27% of white professionals. The primary reason cited for this higher turnover intention is the experience of microaggressions in the workplace. So whilst we call them micro, they actually have a huge impact on people's ability, and I don't think it's necessarily a preference, it is their ability to stay in a workplace. And then lastly, 33%, if you do this work, you are 33% more likely to experience industry-leading profitability. So it's actually just good for business. And as much as universities don't like to admit that they are businesses, they are. Their bottom lines matter, and who doesn't want to be more profitable? So retention matters on a number of levels. There are a number of barriers that we're aware of, and I've just summarised a few of them here. There seems to be a glass ceiling, and again, when you take intersectionality into account, this ceiling is lower and lower. We can see it in many organisations, both in sector and outside of the sector, that frontline roles, junior roles, often have lots of diversity, and that diversity, no matter the characteristic, peters out as you get into more senior roles. And for Black staff in particular, they often don't have the networks and the connections to push them up to those levels, and those networks and connections are vital. So to Sian and James's point earlier about those professional networks that are doing great work, that representation is incredibly important in supporting Black staff to see themselves in more senior positions. Microaggressions and discrimination. So the idea that Black staff experience kind of everyday bias and exclusionary practices, particularly within HE, systems that are systemically racist. It would make sense that those things happen on a daily basis and affect Black staff on a daily basis, and that can lead to frustration and disengagement. Things like Eurocentrism and colorism play into it. So things like natural hairstyles, and I've had lots of conversations with Black women in particular from across sectors who have spoken about having to make a decision between doing something that's healthy and makes sense to them in terms of their hairstyle versus hairstyles that allow them to assimilate to whiteness. Colorism, so a lot of this is seen across various sectors, again, particularly in the media, preference for lighter skin people within the Black community, and if you look at who the most kind of well-known people are, it has been for a number of years that people who are fairer within the Black spectrum or of mixed heritage have managed to be more successful due to their proximity to whiteness. One of the biggest retention barriers is an unwelcoming culture. So saying to Black people that we want you to come, please apply for these roles, but not thinking about what that means. So again, to Sian's point earlier about thinking about the environment that you're trying to create rather than just filling a quota when it comes to hiring Black staff. If you don't think about the culture, then you end up creating a space where there's only one of each characteristic represented, and that can lead to isolation due to a lack of Black colleagues and mentors and people that you can speak to. And that's definitely something that I've experienced and felt quite strongly when I moved into this sector, that what I missed about my previous role was I had Black women that I could go and talk to. And I worked in a very archaic sector before moving into HE. So it's actually quite surprising that the one thing I missed was being able to go and sit at a colleague's desk and say, hey, this happened, and not have to explain why it was a microaggression, and not have to worry that the person receiving that would think I was pulling the race card. They would just understand where I was coming from. And then a lack of institutional support. So I think that overall, again, some of the things that James and Sian brought up, this has to be embedded into your strategy. It has to be embedded into the processes and the ways that you work as an organisation. So professional development, leadership programmes for women that don't consider intersectionality are not leadership programs for Black women. They are leadership programs for white women, which is what we've seen with all the work that's been done around gender pay gap over the last 10 years. Sponsorship is incredibly important. Mentorship is actually more beneficial to the mentor than it is to the mentee. Now, that's not to say it's not beneficial to the mentee, but you get so much out of being a mentor. So it's definitely something that people should consider. But sponsorship is that added level of, you know, mentioning somebody's name in a room when they're not there and putting them forward for roles. So sponsorship is incredibly important. And then also leadership training. Are we training leaders, or are we just expecting people to automatically have those skills? So what can we do? And I'm going to run through these very quickly, but these slides will all be sent to you. Inclusive leadership. So this starts from the top, and it is important that the senior leadership of an organisation is involved, but training people and building leadership teams that are committed to diverse and committed to building diverse environments is incredibly important. Touched on mentorship and sponsorship, so I'm going to move past this one and into professional development. So recognising that it has to be inclusive and intersectional and available to Black employees at different career stages. And it needs to consider psychological safety, particularly in environments that do have systemic barriers. Your culture strategy should focus on fostering an environment where employees feel safe to bring their whole selves to work without fear of discrimination, microaggressions, or the pressure to code switch. And by code switching, we mean having to change your accent or having to change the way you look, the way you dress, the way you do your hair, for example. Address tokenism in your hiring practices, and think about the fact that, like I said, only hiring one person can lead to isolation. So you should be looking to intersectionally hire across all of your hiring practices, not just focus your target on one specific demographic. Develop policies and practices that address the compounded challenges faced by Black women or gender diverse individuals and non-British Black staff. think about the unique forms of bias that they experience, from gendered, racial discrimination to stereotypes surrounding accents and names. Consider that Black staff should be represented at all levels throughout the institution or organisation. There should be people to look up to, and there should also be people who are able to speak to at their own levels in terms of peers. Then consider psychological safety, mental health and well-being, and think about the tailored mental health resources that people need to specifically address the discrimination that they face in the workplace. So mental health support for all, for everyone, is not a one-size-fits-all mechanism. So in terms of next steps, these 5 things are things that you can start literally today. Things that you can take away and do right now that will immediately start to impact the experience of your Black colleagues, or create an environment that welcomes Black colleagues when they do arrive. Think about your current staff surveys and feedback mechanisms. Think about asking questions to understand people's different experiences. Think about analysing that data using monitoring data that you already hold. Go and establish that targeted leadership development program. I think it's really important that these are like day one. We should have already had these things sorted. So going in and starting to petition for these things for Black employees will help with your attraction, because if Black people know that there are targeted programs for them when they join your business, it will attract them and help them to feel valued once they arrive. Embed racial equity training at all organizational levels. EDI training across the spectrum tends to be quite foundational and doesn't address anti-racism. So it's really important that that is done in a way that is interactive and people can engage with, but also in a way that shows how to apply the skills learned in those sessions to their actual jobs. Encourage Black staff participation in decision-making committees. If you don't have Black senior leaders, then make sure that you engage them. I'm really sorry, just one moment. I'm so sorry about that interruption. If you don't have Black staff representation at senior leadership levels, and it's really important that you find ways of engaging Black staff in those processes through focus groups and various other measures. And then finally, you need to track your progress in this space. Universities and most organisations now like to think of themselves as data-led. This is a really great place where you can be data-led by measuring your progress. So create accountability metrics, think about the things that you need to measure and include those in your quarterly or monthly MI updates, and use the data, not just analyse the data, but use the data to make informed decisions. Thank you. And it's over to you, Jenny.
Great, thanks everyone, and thank you for those who've been sending through their questions. We've got some brilliant questions on Slido, so I'm going to dive straight into those now. There's a couple of questions around a welcoming culture, which I think is one for you, Sam. So just generally how to create a welcoming culture, but also to address isolation that might occur if there's only one Black staff member in a team.
Yeah, sure. So I think the first thing to remember is that it's important to be inclusive before you are diverse. So I think if you haven't got a particularly diverse team, there are still lots of things that you can do to make sure that you're being inclusive by, one, just regular conversations, making it part of your, your regular staff meetings or team meeting catch-ups, that you're talking about diversity and inclusion, and thinking about the various diversity that already exists within your team, racial or otherwise. I think that when you do have one Black member of staff, it's really easy to just go to that person and ask them how they want to feel included. But it's also important to not call on them to answer every question that you have about Blackness. Don't ask your Black friend, don't ask your Black colleague. Go on Google. Go on Google, go on Instagram, go on TikTok, go on YouTube, to all of the incredible Black creators that have taken their time to share their stories and their lived experience and their expertise to help people learn. Do not rely on your one Black colleague. They have enough added tax as Black employees. So I think it's really important to balance that. Ask people questions, don't make statements, but also do your own learning. That's actually what allyship is about. I hope that answers that question.
That's great. Thank you, Sam. Do keep those questions coming in. There's no silly questions on this topic. You should feel free to ask anything that's on your mind. I've got a couple of questions for James and Sian. The first is, do you have any good practice examples of higher education specific job descriptions and questions for interviews that you can share? So I think this is about whether we can do a bit of a show and tell of good practice.
Yeah, I think certainly we'll be able to do a guide to sort of interview questions. That's certainly something that we will have the resources on. And I think I mean, in terms of job descriptions, I don't think we'll be able to share specific job descriptions, but again, there's certainly some pointers that we can develop. And I think that one of the things that we were talking about with Sam was the potential to kind of come up with a sort of in a medium term a toolkit that would support these sessions, and I think that's certainly something that would be within that.
Right, thank you. There is another one, and I think this one is very much to do with people having a fixed idea of what they want. It's, do employers have an idea of what they're looking for? How do you deal with that? So I guess, what is the pushback on people being too rigid in what they think they want for that role?
Yeah, it's something that we see so commonly, less so than when I probably started working with universities 5-6 years ago, where I think, the brief that we would always get is another Russell Group university or another institution in the UK. I suppose what we have to do as partners of universities is try our best to open their mind up. And the way that we can often do that is by talking to them about the skills needed to do the job, rather than what the background of the person is. By focusing on skills rather than background, we can then open the university's mind up to different sectors and help them understand, I think, is the most important part. Because I don't think it's that everyone wants to hire necessarily from university. It's that they feel forced to do so because they're not actually aware that other skill sets exist in other environments. Certainly in the sector that I operate in student accommodation and commercial services, we're probably quite lucky in the fact that the skills are really transferable. I think that there are more challenges in more skills specific jobs like hard services or engineering, for example, where ultimately you do need that experience of fixing something or having the knowledge of how a system operates to do the job. Whereas I think there are a lot of vocations out there where the skill set's more transferable sector to sector. And that's where we really encourage universities to open and broaden their mindset with regards to attracting new talent. And there are loads of ways to do that in terms of advertising in different places, which we've already mentioned, but also thinking about from a networking perspective, who you can ask recommendations for. It shouldn't just be people in universities. That should stretch further afield into other sectors as well.
Thank you. And then there's a question that I think kind of carries on from there. It's about that there is a representation of Black staff at manual level, but underrepresentation at professional level. I know this has been commented on already. Anything that we can do, anything actionable there? I don't think there's a quick fix, but anything that might be useful for people to take away.
I'm happy to pick up on some of this and hand over to MLG as well. But I think that one of the key things is what James just mentioned around the idea of transferable skills, and think looking a little bit more broadly. But also what I mentioned earlier was those professional development pathways. So are we making it clear what the development pathways are from manual to professional services roles? Are we then creating giving the training and programs that allow the people to move over into those spaces as well?
Thanks, Sam. And Melissa, you wanted to come on.
Yeah, I did. I think sometimes as well, what we need to look at, sometimes the barriers, the interview itself and who's sitting on the actual panel. And one of the things that I had, which was a scheme at UCL when I worked there, was a scheme called a Fair Recruitment Specialist. So basically they had a number of Black staff or underrepresented groups that were actually trained to be fair recruitment specialists. So we would go on to sit onto interviews. You could be at any grade and you would sit on interviews. So actually you could be there if you noticed unconscious bias or conscious bias going on and actually challenge at that interview stage. So I do think everything that everyone said is great, but there is also the gatekeeper for people sometimes getting jobs is that interview stage.
Thank you, that's great. There's a couple of questions, Sam, I think for you, picking up on some of the things that you mentioned in your presentation. And the first one is about profitability. So you talked about diversity and inclusion leading to profitability. First of all, are there any examples of this? And also, why does that matter?
I'm going to start with why it matters. So I, as you might imagine, am very much a strong believer in the moral case for doing the right thing. However, the realization that in order to get organisations and institutions to do the right thing, we have to understand what the right thing for them is. So this is about strategic alignment. This is about understanding the commerciality of the sector that we work in. Even down to things like attraction. We know that applicant figures have been low in recent years, or lower in recent years, and that's not getting easier. We also know that Black applicants are the fastest growing demographic of applicants. It would stand to reason that if you did some work on attracting Black students and improving their experiences, that they might apply, and therefore that would raise your applicant figures. So it's just about understanding the strategic direction that the institution or organisation needs to go in and aligning those needs. So when you're writing that business case, which everyone always talks to me about being the most difficult part of inclusion work, stats such as the McKinsey one I shared are vital in helping you to build that business case and get the additional funding or resource or whatever it is you need to be able to do this work. So that's why it's important to know that, and that's why it matters. In terms, there's lots and lots of research, and as Sian alluded to earlier, we are hoping to pull together a toolkit that shares more and more of this information. So I think there may be lurking somewhere, I'll see if I can find it, in the Living Black at University report, I did do a think piece that talked about the commercial aspect and has some more statistics in it, but this is definitely something that we bring into a toolkit as well.
Thanks, Sam. And the second one was around the idea that mentors will benefit from the mentoring process. Is there anything else you can share on that?
Oh, I don't know if you remember the stats, Jenny. It was something that Renee shared with me, actually. I'm not sure if you remember. But I think in terms of there's been some studies around the benefit of mentoring for the mentee and the mentor, and it was something like a 63% career boost for mentors, and that's because of the development of a great skill set. That's because of listening to people and understanding their needs and being able to respond to them. It's the solution finding. So the development of a huge number of skills as a mentor that can lead to boosting your career and moving you up to the next step. That doesn't negate the fact that mentees get a lot of benefit, but it's just a reminder that a lot of the time people don't do mentoring or won't sign up for it because they think they don't have the time, and actually understanding that the benefit that they get from it is something that they should make the time for.
Thank you, that's great. Melissa, did you want to come in on this one as well?
Yeah, and I just wanted, on Monday, Cuba, we hosted a roundtable on mentoring on the launch of year 3 of our mentoring. So again, I would really express to everyone on this call to really tap into that for your Black employees as well, to really be showing them, making space for them to do it as well, because sometimes they may feel like I can't do it, I'm too busy, but really showing that there are programs out there. Cuba, who works in partnership with Unite and also the Commission, we have that mentoring program where we can support. There is nothing better. When I was going through my career, I didn't have any Black role models that I could speak to. I didn't. I had to create my own tribe. But there were people who weren't Black, female, male, who were my mentors as well, that got me to that next level and continue to support me. But for me, as a Black senior member of staff, I get called all the time to mentor people, and I can't turn anyone away. I don't know if that's going to make it hard for me now, because people need to see representation. They need to see that someone else got there. And I know people such as Paloma, who's in the sector, and there aren't that many Black senior leaders in our sector, and we really need to be amplifying that.
Thank you. Keep those questions coming in. We've got a couple more, but it'd be great to get some more. We've got a really good and quite challenging question, quite a complicated one. I'm just going to ask it to the panel and see who wants to put their hand up to this. But it's, do you have tips on balancing institutional expectations for mandatory anti-racism training with perceived conflict with academic freedom? And the new legislation around that, and the new free speech sort of approach. Yeah, a bit of a tension there. Well, anyone want to weigh in on this one?
A very interesting conversation with a VC recently about this, so I'm not going to claim to have the answer, but I can definitely share some thoughts. I think that universities are absolutely the spaces in which we should be having discussions that move us forward as a society. I think there's a really importance in being able to have critical discussion and debate within those spaces. However, it is important that those conversations are had in a way that is non-discriminatory, and I think that at a very base level, I talk quite a lot about not creating safe spaces, but creating brave spaces. And I think that really ties into this conversation. I don't think that I can create a safe space because I don't know what anyone is going to say in that space. But what I can do is create a brave space where we can be respectful of each other and speak up and speak out without fear of being discriminated against. But also we can, call each other out when we're wrong. So I think that within what I've just said, somewhere maybe there's a ground where we can say, there's a need to remain non-discriminatory in our practice. There is a need for a diversity of thought in order to have conversations around academic freedom. And academic freedom is not an excuse to discriminate against any individual. I don't know if that answers it, but that's my 2 pence.
Thanks, Sam. Did anyone else from the panel want to weigh in on that one?
Or anyone on the call? I'm sure there's lots of people here with lots of thoughts.
If not, I've got a much simpler question. Oh, Becky, go ahead.
Hello. So it's a big topic at the moment here, and some of the issues that we've got is that it's likely that staff members will no longer be allowed to have pass fails on anything which is training related that is based on belief systems. So you can't base a piece of training around something like critical race theory, for example, and then have a staff member be required to pass fail that, because that would be in conflict with academic freedom. So I think one of the things that we're looking at to get around it is you have to complete the training, but you don't necessarily have to pass fail at the end of it, or we're going to have to need to review and reframe quite a lot of the training that is mandatory for staff, or certain levels of training become mandatory at certain points within somebody's career progression and development. So as your contract changes, as the responsibilities and accountabilities become greater, you might be more expected to be in line with institutional values. And I also think as well that at some point, institutions just going to have to turn around and say, these are our values, you work for us, this is what you sign up for. You can talk about things in an academic setting in your classrooms and discuss belief systems in a very structured debate protected space, and we have to kind of encourage our students to develop those what I think are quite lost skills around challenging conversations and debating skills that they don't necessarily have at the moment, and create more of an environment where we encourage that as well. But there is an absolute tension at the moment between what we are expecting staff members to go through in terms of training and agreeing to, and then where that sits and where that aligns with their own belief systems. I mean, there's also, you know, for example, if we had a staff member in our student support who wanted to join a pro-Palestine camp and protest, would they still be able to support their Jewish students? Would Jewish students be able to come to them and sit down with them and say, we need your support? And it's just, you know, how do we frame all of this? And it's getting very, very murky out there.
Thanks, Becky. I think it's something that most universities are struggling with, and other organisations as well. So that was a really great one to discuss. I'm just wondering how much time we need for the wrap up. We've got a couple more questions. Do we have time for those, or should we go to a close?
So
I think questions are good, but I also have a wrap up too. So yeah, it's up to you.
Okay.
Jenny, if there's lots of, or if there's any questions, we're going to do a follow up, so we'll be able to answer any outstanding questions.
Yeah, there's a couple more. I think we can answer them, you know, in the follow up. So in that case, I'm going to hand back.
Thank you, Jenny. Over to you, Melissa.
Thank you. So my name's Melissa Brown. I'm the Deputy Director of Commercial Services and Estates, Chair-elect at Cubo, and also the job that I'm most proud of is Deputy Chair of the Living Black at University Commission. And I just want to thank everyone for such a fantastic and insightful and really necessary discussion today. It was hosted by the Living Black at University Commission, but this roundtable has really highlighted, and I hope, the urgent need for greater Black representation at all levels at university staffing. And I think the fact that we've got questions that we couldn't even finish answering today tells us that there is an appetite for this, and that makes me so happy as a commissioner as well. I think the key takeaways from this discussion that I just wanted to highlight is really that case for diverse representation. I believe it was really reinforced today why representation in university staffing is not just a moral imperative, but a strategic one. And as Sam said and highlighted, I'm so thankful she did, it's actually a really commercial one as well. So if we can't get people in the hearts, then actually in the pocket is where we need to really be pushing this. The findings are clear, and please, if you haven't read the Living Black at University report, please go and read it. But underrepresentation has a direct impact on well-being, belonging, and the success of our Black students and staff. But also it has a direct impact on recruitment as well. So I just wanted to highlight that. And then the second one is on recruitment strategies. And thank you to MRG for that. You know, you really highlighted the systematic barriers that continue to hinder Black talent. But what was great was you gave us practical and proactive strategies, you know, things such as setting EDI objectives about Black talent, the advert writing, the website, mentoring, sponsorship. And I just wanted to also highlight that fair recruitment specialist on interview panels. And I think all of these practices will really help us to do inclusive recruitment and also addressing the unconscious bias and ensuring there is diversity in leadership roles. And then from Sam talking about the inclusive environments, we know that recruitment is only part of the equation. We know that's only part. Retention is just as critical, and to hear that Black staff are moving every 2 years. And I have to say from my experience, please look at my LinkedIn, I did that a lot. We must be intentional about fostering inclusive and supportive workplaces where Black employees, as well as our students, feel valued and they can thrive. And mentorship, career development opportunities, leadership accountability, these are all keys to ensuring that diversity isn't just about numbers, but it's about creating meaningful and lasting change. And again, I want to stress about data. We need to be looking at our data. We have so much of it and we never look at it. We never take a moment to stop. And I wonder if we were to do a report or to look benchmarking of senior leaders in Black positions in senior leadership roles, what impact that would have in our sector, because we would see that it is not where we need it to be. So as we move forward, and as you know where I always sit, the challenge is clear. There is a challenge here. We must turn today's conversation into action. It can't just be a conversation. We can't just leave her and say that was a great round table. What are we going to do? Change will not happen in isolation. It requires collaboration, commitment. There are loads of universities on this call. Please make note of the people on this call. Contact them. Ask each other, what are we doing in this space? And we need to do this so that we can sustain that effort in this initiative across our universities. For once, I've been on a roundtable where I haven't cried. For once, because this subject means a lot to me, but actually it means a lot to the students as well. So thank you again for your contributions and engagement today. Really thank you to Sharon and James from MRG, to Sam Kingsley for your presentation, and for Jenny for facilitating. And often we don't say thank you to the chair. Thank you, Carol, for leading on this, because we need to push for progress and ensure our universities truly reflect the diverse communities that we serve. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.